Hey,
Hi,
Ben.
David. How are you doing?
How you doing?
Good, good.
Very good. What a mess.
Talking
Sorry.
about thermodynamics or
That just like you look in the basement of machine learning to try and find truth, right? You just find rubbish. Anyway, sorry. But I can't say that it's rubbish because I don't understand it. But I did not come to any clarity by reading all this stuff. But maybe I missed it. I don't know. So
yeah,
tell
it's
me a little-
complicated stuff with lots of strange history. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of like reading about how sausages are made, right?
So what was your thesis? Sorry, I'm very curious now.
My thesis is a very practical thing. I work with a company, Honeywell. So there is this apparatus, terahertz spectrometer, which basically emits a beam at the terahertz frequency, 10 to the 12 hertz. And so it's
Particles or photons?
Photons.
Photons.
So it's photons, and what's special about it is that usually in optics you measure intensity, right? The phases wash out but here you could actually, there's a technique for measuring the phase exactly. So we have both the amplitude and the phase. So it allows you to study materials when you get a terahertz beam to go through them. It changes the phase in complicated ways. It's a sort of a broadband signal. So you look at the frequencies and how each one of them change. And so I developed this model for something Honeywell cared about manufacturing. And yeah,
so using K-space, X-ray. I did some X-ray crystallography back in the day, and we worked in K-space.
It's not a geometrical thing because you can assume it's a beam going straight, and you only measure this like it is small cone of angles, so you don't go around like X-ray, try to get all the diffraction angles.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so you don't care about the angles, you just care about the frequencies that come out around the same angle. So,
and what were you able to reconstruct from the model? Were you able to reconstruct?
Basically what we tried to do is to so you know how each material, like simple ones, have like a refractive index, right? Like water is whatever 1.3. So in any sort of complicated material, that's a complex refractive index. So we tried to find that as a function of frequency. So that's called, there's a whole bunch of books on like effective medium theories. How do you effectively use one parameter to describe whatever sample of something? That something could be anything from like superconductors to whatever packaging material, which we even looked at for Honeywell at some point. And then, so if you, for example, add water to your material, it's more absorbent. So that increases the complex or the imaginary parts of your effective medium, and it absorbs. So then you can tell how much water there was by how much signal was absorbed. So that's like one simple effect that you can detect.
Okay. All right. So there was a determinism between, you could draw inference from the difference between the input and the output.
Yeah, you basically define it as a transfer function, right? The amplitude of the output over the amplitude of the input is some complicated function that was my job to figure out what it is, parameterize it, measure it, quantify the errors and all that stuff. And so once you have that for a given material, then all you have to do is just, collect a reference, stick the material, collect another pulse, divide it in the frequency domain and fit it. And then hopefully what your parameter or what your material is made of.
So you would have a classifier at the output that would classify the results into some
well, it's
label
not
that we could use to say this is.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's closer to regression. It's not classification. Like we want to know how much of one ingredient
is in your material. So you get a parameter value, not just the presence of a parameter or not. I see.
Yeah. So it's meant to be, so it could actually be really accurate. Like we could measure like the thickness of paper to like 0.5 microns by just doing this.
Wow.
So there's a lot of tricks and math that goes into it to make it that accurate, which is the kind of thing that people, I guess, in manufacturing care about.
Okay, so you weren't worried about the photons themselves or anything. You had an instrument and you were doing good old-fashioned experimental physics to, put some stimulus in here, get some output over here, and then build a model that predicts that if I put this in, I would get that, then you can do the test. And okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so you're a pragmatist then. I get it. Cool.
Well, it's actually a funny story because I really wanted to go into theory. What made me want to go into theory was this stuff you're reading about now, like StatMech stuff.
Right.
As I talked to the professor that I really liked, he was this Chinese guy who gave us all these Chinese sort of stories around physics too, which was entertaining. But anyways, he was like an amazing teacher. So I asked him, like, I want to go into theory, should I do it? Well, he told me, well, if you think you're really, really great and much better than everybody else, go into it, work really, really hard with no money for 10 years, and maybe then you'll make it. Other than that, go to experiment. So he completely discouraged me from going into it. So.
Okay. All right. Hi, Rose. Welcome. It's good to see you.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, my comment to Payan was, what a mess. God, I read all this stuff like 3 times.
Yeah, I don't think it's as well written as all the philosophical stuff we read, because I think if you don't know about this stuff, you won't learn from it it's like a really condensed historical version of things that is just a bunch of words. Like if you don't know it, you don't know it.
I mean, I'm reading the book with Boltzmann, and that's very well written. Like, the book is awesome. This is not a very good article, or I'm just not understanding. But yeah, so they always leave. The thing that I just hate about the article, and the thing that just doesn't make sense to me, is they don't talk about the observer, right? They just assume objective reality. And, you know, we're talking about reality, and the fact that there's an observer in the loop is moot. Like, it's not relevant. I can't imagine how that can be.
Well, doesn't that come in when I don't know, I haven't gotten that far, but don't they, I assume at some point they talk about Maxwell's demon, right? So that you can think of as an observer, and it actually has a central role in the whole resolving of the paradox.
So Kant basically says that time is something that happens in our head, right? It's not something that happens in the world. And so his cosmological view is observer-centric. He doesn't think that there is any objective reality out there. He thinks that we can only see through our perceptions, and when we see through our perceptions, are we looking at the world, or are we just looking at artifacts from our perceptions? Scary question. And that's what I think we're getting to in this stuff, to me at least, in that the agent is the problem, not reality. Like, reality is just fine. It's our models. I don't know.
Which problem are you talking about? I would say
exactly.
There is no problem.
Exactly. Yes. So the problem I'm asking about is, okay, if I have a coin and I toss the coin, and it comes up heads as opposed to tails, I won't be disappointed because I have an expectation that it's just as likely to be heads as it is tails, right? So there's no regret, or there's no, oh, I was, unlucky. There's no sensation, there's no feeling of badness if the result comes out in a certain way. So, if I'm rolling a dice and I get a 6, it's like, oh, that's a little bit. But if I roll 1,000-sided dice and get 1,000, right? So that, to me, is different in the agent. It's not a difference in the world, right? The agent, when you roll the 1,000-sided dice, is disappointed that it wasn't somewhere in the middle and it wasn't this extreme value. What does the dice care? Like, it's just as likely to be 100 or 1,000 or whatever it is. This is Boltzmann's argument, right? Which is just a box of noise. And then the Poincaré theorem says that that box of noise will go through every possible state, or go through a large number of states again and again and again. That doesn't tell us anything about the direction of time. Anyway, I just find this a very messy, poorly articulated area, that's all. I think the articulation was what I have quibble with, not not the thinking. I'm sure the thinking is very good, but
Well, I think part of the problem is I don't think we know the answer to the question of what is the direction of time coming from. There's a bunch of different ways of people try to justify it, but I don't think we know the answer. So it's all speculation. Like, so I think there's the cosmological one they get into, right? You assume that we started with a very sort of low entropy state in the universe, and then it's going towards high. There's even ways to do it the other way around, and then there's these many world interpretations of the quantum mechanics that gets really messy. Yeah, I don't think anybody knows after all this debate, but I'm not sure what you need to do. What do you need to find out to be able to answer this question? Like, what is it that's missing? Do we know if we had a piece of information, we could answer this or not? Like, I don't know. I don't even know the answer to that.
saying I do either. What I'm trying to get at is how should we interpret probabilistic models, right? What is GPT-3 telling us about the world? Is it science? Like, is that science, or is it just an echo chamber?
I mean, I guess, as you said, I'm a pragmatist. It's a tool and it's useful for generating things for people. What do you mean by is it science? How could a model be science, right? Like, it doesn't.
And then we get into the philosophy of science, and then it stops being science, and it's just something that's a tool that's used for convincing people of things, which is not really science. But
I think some of it comes down to this idea of, is it a thing in itself, or is it that something that we've created it? And we kind of keep coming back to this. I think we almost have to have some belief that there are things in themselves out there, right? That we believe there are physical things in the world, and that they are more than just our perception of them, right? Yes, we might modify them through how we sense them, but we really do think that those things are there and that they have certain properties and they interact in some way. Mm-hmm. But then it starts to get messy when we then start to bring abstract constructs into it, and maybe even categories and generalizations that we have conceived of that maybe aren't there at all, right? And I guess when we link this into the whole entropy and information growth, like, part of the way I look at it is that anything that can manifest probably will manifest eventually. Mm-hmm. And when we put constraints on something based upon our prior beliefs, that's when we start to see things a particular way as opposed to seeing things as they really are. Mm-hmm. And the sort of dynamical part of it is interesting because we want to believe that the past is going to tell us everything we need to know about now and the future. And I guess that's the sticking point, is that it doesn't, because the entire environment has changed.
Yes. I was only brought this up just to say, yes, Rose, I'm completely with you on this. I totally agree with you. I was thinking about exactly the same concept. So yes. So we have a priori, we have a posteriori, we have the thing that you're talking about. This is Kant, this is straight Kant, right? The thing in and of itself. It might have components, it might not, but it might be made up of other things, right? So it might be a microsystem, or it might be a tree of systems, right? So we have systems within systems within systems. This is just pure speculation. This doesn't work. I haven't implemented this. I'm just trying to capture my ideas. So don't put any weight in this. So a system is just a thing, right? So we can basically create some arbitrary box in which we can have a thing. And then a cause takes a system, and then it affects that system in some way and produces an updated version of the system or a new system, right? So we have this idea of a cause being a function that takes something and changes it in a real way and produces the changed thing, okay? And so we could say that a frame, an experiment, or a universe, whatever you want to call it, which does exist, has a set of causes built into it, right? This kind of the equations of the system, and then the system itself. And then as each cause affects the system evolves. Okay, I'm trying very hard not to use the word time. I'm just trying to use the word sequence, right? So this is partial orders, right? So if I have something and I have a cause, then the cause can have an effect on the thing and change it to something else, right? So I'm trying to build it up from the bottom. But where do these things come from? Well, we have three kinds. We have a generator, which makes something from nothing. And I don't know what that is. We have a consumer, which
it's
takes
God.
Sure. Okay. I wrote this the other day as, what was it? Universe equals some function of nothing. So, yeah, so a generator generates things and a consumer consumes things. I guess we'd have a transformer, which would be a cause. So a cause takes a thing and turns it into something else, right? So we have a transformer. And then we have this very, very special thing called a replicator. And I think replicators are really interesting because they're essentially, they have some causes that allow them to, given some system and a thing within that system, they can make another thing that's the same as this thing or very similar to it.
So that piece is really key though. The same as this thing or very similar to it.
Right.
The similar to it, like I think time comes into that too, because is it the same thing?
Okay.
Right? Is anything like all of these things that you have described, are they, can we say A is equal to B?
No, they're not the same. My twin is not me, right? Because they exist in a different spatio-temporal frame, right? So yeah, nearly replicate. That's better. Thank you. And then we get into a representable replicator, which is a kind of replicator that can be represented as a material object, right? So yeah, so right. So you can have serialized, whatever you want to call it, persist or whatever. I don't know what the word is, but so what I'm trying to get at is that there's this concept in category theory called a representable. All right, and a representable is something where you take a function, something that actually does something in the real world, and you just turn it into a bunch of data. Right? You can represent it as data and then reconstitute it. But the problem is with the reconstitution, you can't, like I'm trying to avoid God, where I just make something from nothing. Okay, so let's not make something from nothing, let's make it from something else, which is this nearly replicate idea. This is Dawkins' replicators and vehicles, right? So this is what I'm trying to get at is, and I was trying to build up to.
Can we go back to represent for a second? Is represent decomposable?
Well, a thing is decomposable, so yes.
Okay. So to represent something, do you build it from the ground up?
Okay, so unfortunately you have to do it as a replicator. So the only way that you can turn a represent, like if you take a replicator and then create a representation of it, okay, then we need a reconstitutor. You are correct, sorry, yes. So there's something else called a, okay, so a representable, yes, it needs to go the other way. So given some, yeah. Okay, so replicator. You are correct. Thank you. Yes. Reconstitute. Okay, yeah. So you can create a representation, which is just a set of values, And then you can reconstitute that back into a replicator again. But would you reconstitute it back into a replicator or into a vehicle? I think you'd reconstitute it back into a vehicle. But anyway, I was trying to make sense of this article. That's what I was trying to do here, and I couldn't get there.
So I'm still curious. I think we talked briefly about this, like the whole idea of time. Like, are you on board with Kant that time is just in our head and it's partial ordering that matters? Because that goes very much against my intuition. I want to know why you believe that.
Does time pass when you're asleep?
Yes.
Only because somebody else told you so.
Well, you would, if you, assuming you wake up, you would be able to check for yourself with probably a lot of detail exactly what would have happened in that time, given your initial conditions before you go to sleep.
But the only way that you could construct how it should be is to have a model in your mind.
Yeah, but you could say the same thing about partial order. If you have no memory, partial order doesn't exist either.
Sure. And I'm trying not to get entangled with these. You are correct. I don't know at the end. Okay, my honest straightforward answer is I have no idea.
Because I mean, I guess my default is that time exists because we have such a strong intuition that it does. Maybe it doesn't, but if you're gonna go with that it doesn't, you must have a good reason for going against your intuition, right? Yeah, I mean, I don't expect we're going to solve this. I'm sure people have been debating this for millennia, but I'm just curious why you personally, you seem to be like set on not sort of taking time to be there and just go by Kant's, I guess, understanding of it.
So Kant takes you to the middle of a jungle and you kind of have to fight your way out of the jungle to get to a clearing where you can see the world. I haven't fought my way out of the jungle yet, so I'm not there. I don't think he was able to get out of the jungle either. And so it's very nice just to ignore the jungle and pretend that it's not there. I'm spending some time wandering through the jungle, trying to grasp what's going on. I mean, we can spend a little bit of time on the categories if you like, but that's not really relevant to this particular thing.
So in category theory, does time not exist, or
no,
we just don't talk about it?
Yeah,
okay.
There's no such thing. Yeah, it's independent of time. So, but let's
think about it in terms of the multi-worlds, right? Multi-alternate worlds thing. It kind of makes me wonder too if time is really, really real, right? Like if we come back to the idea that everything is out there, or it will eventually be out there, right? Mm-hmm. And eventually is even our sort of, it's putting it in a container that we can understand. So if we think that every possibility of everything will eventually manifest, then time is just, it's a container we put it in and a perspective we give it.
Sure. Yes. Yes.
And I guess it's a question of, is it expanding and unfolding, or is it all there already and we're traversing through it?
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that physicists believe, right? The past, present, and future all exist at the same time. And
then there's no time, right?
Yeah, but I mean, again, that goes goes against your intuition, right? So you have to, I think the onus is on whoever comes up with that to explain why they think that's true. Just because it's possible to write it down on paper doesn't mean it's true, right? And if there's no way to check it, maybe it doesn't matter.
Right. I mean, I think what we keep bumping up against is we have these limitations to the way we perceive the world.
Yes.
And it's very hard for us to let go of something because well, of course it's like this because this is my experience. And when you sort of realize like, oh gosh, like maybe I'm just creating all of that, it takes you to an entirely different place.
It is actually interesting because even the partial ordering, like if you get into relativity, the order of events could could be swapped by different observers, right? You don't know. So even the ordering is up for grabs, right? It's not.
I think it's really interesting when we talk about some of this stuff, like very practically with the causal stuff. A lot of the things that we do, we're manipulating stuff up here and describing it like it's causal, but it's not. Like, we're changing the metrics a lot of the time, but we're not actually really having impact on the world in a causal way. We're shaking things up, right? We're changing something.
Perturbing the system.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes. But it's
So
not.
you're saying
clear.
that's not causal? What do you mean?
I think a lot of the causal stories we tell ourselves, they're not really causal. There's a certain level of correlation there, and we sort of, and I think that's where probability is interesting in it, because if it's deterministic and it happens every single time, that's a lot easier for me to accept. Whereas when we talk about probability and it happens a lot of the time, and then we make causal claims based on that, that's dodgy ground as far as I'm concerned.
Hubris,
right?
yes.
That
So we
reminds
have a
me of
TV.
the,
Sorry, go ahead. Yep.
I was just gonna tell that you probably heard of the superstition pigeons and all that. Have you seen those videos?
The pigeons that can.
And so they basically, I don't know the exact details of this experiment. It's replicable experiments. You put the pigeon in a box and they just do random things. And once in a while you give them food. So over time, they sort of think that a certain combination of things they do, like pecking at something a bunch of times and then going around, will get them the food just randomly because they were doing that and they happened to get the food. So they I guess even in their brains, they construct these stories of what causes food to come in, and it's like completely random. And they've even done that with humans, and they tell them you need to figure out a set of actions so that we give you the reward, and the humans start like playing with things. And eventually they get the reward, and they all come up like, and it's completely random, so it's impossible to do it, but they all come up with some story of if you jump on the table 3 times and do a backflip, you get the food. And even though they don't get it all the time, and some of the time, they still go with that story, which is interesting.
But we do it in everyday life all the time. And like we do it in scientific life all the time too.
Yeah, we have no choice, do we?
Well, I think we could try.
And then you'd have to put yourself back in Kant's jungle and try and fight your way to the edge.
Well, I mean, I think when you see incongruence, right, you either walk towards that and accept it, or you try and make it go away because it shakes your beliefs, right? Like it comes down to, what are you trying to do? Are you really trying to understand, or are you trying to tell yourself that you have it right? And I think we try and tell ourselves we have it right because it's scary. Like a lot of this stuff is really scary. It's like, if everything I believe goes away, right? Let's say there is no time, and like that sort of stuff is really scary to think about.
I agree. This is how I've been thinking. I very good insights. I was going to use the TV metaphor where from, I think it's The Exorcist, where the little kid's staring at the TV, looking at the noise, and he's seeing stuff in the noise that we can't see. Are they there or not?
Matrix.
I have a friend who is in late stage, very, very smart man, by the way, but he's in late stage Parkinson's. And he sees people everywhere. Like he sees them behind me. I'm on a video call with him and he said, look around behind you, there's someone there. And I look around, I don't see them. Are they real?
Now it's getting literally scary.
No, it does.
Are they real?
Scary. It gets really scary. My mother tells the story about this woman that she knew who was dying, and she went to visit her at the hospital, and she was talking to her, and she kept saying to her, like, "Do you see them over there? Do you see them?" And my mother's like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "There are rats over there. There are rats under the chair over there." And my mother was like, I don't see them. But I feel like at various points in my life, like I'll see rats, and then when I, like, if I'm not scared, I'll see birds, right? That it's just like, oh, is that a rat or is that a bird, right? Like,
okay, so everything that we see is real, but what he's seeing is not real, right?
So yes, exactly. This comes back to the narrative stuff of right? Like if we all agree and we all say this is the way it is, then that's okay, because we're all in this tribe together. Whereas as soon as somebody says, oh, I don't see it that way, then they're crazy. We have to exclude them from the tribe because they're going to destabilize everything.
Yes. Yes.
It
This gets
reminds
into
me of
evolution. Yeah.
have you guys seen the Netflix show Stranger Things?
I have
I
not.
saw
I watched a
some,
few of the first episodes,
Yeah.
but not very
Just
far.
the premise is interesting. Just I won't spoil it for you. But there is basically you live in this world, this small town, and there is this other world. They call it upside down. So they sort of depict it as it's like a flipping in the like axis. But so basically, it's exactly where this world is, but it's in another dimension. So everything looks similar. So there's like houses are roughly the same, but in one dimension everything is like great, in the other dimension everything is falling apart. So the whole story is about these beings that can go between the two dimensions. They mess things up, but the premise is interesting that there could be multiple dimensions within even our spatial dimension that we just don't see. I'm sure lots of people have been seeing like elves. If you do drugs, I guess people talk about seeing elves and talking to elves and things like that.
So I think this is interesting in terms of the, we've talked a lot about the building structures to make our representations, right? And David, I think you've talked or thought a lot about this in terms of even like protein replication and the actual generating physical something that supports these structures, right? Just to make it
Yes.
purely biological.
Yes.
And so how do some of these, I think we sort of think in terms of, well, some of the structures are innate, right? We have structures for thinking that we are born with. And then some of them we develop over time through experience and through education to some degree, right? Either formal or otherwise. We develop these models of how we think about the world. And we've talked a lot about, well, there are some pieces of our cognitive, the whole system 1, system 2, where we're relying on stuff and we don't cognitively think through, we just make decisions about it. But that's structure driven as much as system 2, where we make formal representations and try to think through it.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like a point in time comes when we become familiar enough with something that we then push it into the unconscious processing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And the more mastery you have over something, or the more experience you have over something, the more likely it's to be in the system 1.
Yeah,
Right.
The wonderful book, The Enigma of Reason, shows a progression. So it is a smooth progression from system 2 to system 1, which I don't have an argument with. Yeah, so we start off with novel experience, and then we gain familiarity with that. And then after we gain familiarity, then associative memory kicks in. And if associative memory is good enough, then we just defer the whole thing to associative memory.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if there are, I'm reading this book, Atomic Habits, you probably have heard of it. I wonder if there are links to that, because the same with habits, right? Like when you try to do something first, it's effortful, but your brain, just to save energy and be more efficient, at some point just encodes it into this automatic sequence of actions that'll be done once the cue is there, right? And then you don't think about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll share one more little tidbit I've been working on with you, just to see if it kind of resonates. I'm very curious. So I drew this picture a few days ago, so let me explain it. And so this is my new model of agency, and it's based on cell biology. So in cell biology, there's something called a transcription network, and the idea is that when a stimulus arrives at the surface of the cell, it gets transformed into what's called a transcription factor, which we could refer to as a kind of a molecular symbol, like a flag. That flag then gets passed into the nucleus, and it moderates or mediates the production of proteins which are being transcribed from the DNA itself. So you have a replicator. In fact, it is a representable replicator, which is the physical structure of the DNA. you have a molecule moving along the DNA, reading the reconstituting the representable replicator, producing a protein. So it's reading the information, whatever the hell that is, out of the DNA and producing proteins. And then these proteins go on to produce us. Okay. So this is kind of my abstract variant of that. So we have the environment. We have in the center of it, we have, I'm just simply saying a set of causes or a set of functions, if you will, right? So given a symbol, I will do this. Okay.
1 second, I'll be right back.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll wait for Rose. But have you looked at transcription factors or cell biology or assistance biology?
No, not very much. No, I don't know much.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting. It's kind of like a biological computer. Very interesting. So I'll just go through this here. So my terrible model is this: is that we have a bunch of functions in the middle, which I'll call causes, which are a priori, right? You can write all those beforehand and shove them in that little thing, and then, you know, if I receive a little black triangle flag, then I'll call function f, and it will move me to the left, let's say. All right. So we have this a priori core, right, which is given a symbol, I will do this, or given some, you know, some preponderance of symbols, I will do this. And then we have these things at the edges here, which I call perceptors, and they take signals from the environment and they turn it into symbols, right? So they transform a huge kind of totality of different kinds of symbols into a plurality of symbols. So, you know, I have 7 symbols or I have 10,000 symbols, but I don't have an infinite number of symbols, and I don't have an infinite, this is a finite bounded system. And so each symbol has to correlate to some cause, right? So if I receive an ultraviolet photon and I produce a symbol and that doesn't do anything, I'm not benefited by putting all of the investment into the structure that can detect that, because I don't use the symbol that it generates. So that would be evolved out of the system. So you would end up having a cell or an agent which only has perceptions that generate symbols that actually do something, that actually mean something. So meaning simply means a symbol that, when perceived, will provoke a response. Anyway, so the idea is that this kind of middle donut band here, I call symbol soup. So if I'm getting a bunch of symbols from over here saying yes, and a bunch of symbols, or bye, let's say bye, 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 and I get a bunch of symbols over here saying sell, 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 they cancel each other out, right? Because they're roughly equal, there's no, it doesn't trigger a function, so nothing happens, right? I think you've seen the video where they put a dog in the middle and the 2 owners run away exactly at the same speed, and the dog doesn't move because it doesn't know which way to go, right? So that's what I'm trying to get at, is that there's no clear dominance in the soup. But if a certain dominance arises, if I'm getting more buys than sells, or if I'm getting more hots than colds, then at some threshold, the causal system will take over and perform an action. And so I'm trying to build an agency model based on this. Just curious what your thoughts are. Does that make any sense to you, or not really?
Yep. Again, curious, going back to time again. So are you ignoring time again? So the signals, it doesn't matter, or even are you ignoring partial order? Let's go there. Like the
partial order to me is a cause and effect relationship, right? So if I move into a part of parameter space where a cause is triggered, then it will automatically teleport me to another part of parameter space without my choice, and there may be no path back.
So if a signal for, let's say, buy comes in, and like immediately after, or 10 minutes after, or 10 hours later, a signal for sell comes in, it doesn't matter how much time elapses, you just execute in order.
No, the signals do degrade. So time to me is kind of like digestion. The symbols break down over time, right? So as the symbols enter into the soup, they don't stay there forever, they decay, right? So this is entropy again, right? So this leads us right back to the beginning, and I get stuck in this. Anyway, these are very incomplete ideas. I'm not defending them. I'm just curious what they provoke.
There is a guy who actually had formalized the version of, I think I've seen that diagram before. I can't remember what's his name. The guy who does, so he puts it in the information theoretic perspective, but he talks about cells. I think Robert mentioned him in Carl Friskin. Let me find his, I think he has something very similar.
Cool.
Let me find him. Or
Yeah.
Friston.
So,
Yeah, Carl Friston, sorry. Yes. Let me, so this is his Wikipedia page.
That starts to get interesting once you have then multiple agents acting like that, and you start to see a macro state emerge from all the actions of the micro states.
yeah. So this is what I was trying. Once again, this is entirely speculative, but yeah, this is what I was trying to get at down here. And so a microsystem is just a system, and a system is just a collection of things, right? And so a macro system is just a collection of microsystems, but it's a system as well. And a relation, this is interesting, is a posteriori, right? So this is something that emerges from experience, right? This is what Kant calls a synthetic relation. Not a priori synthetic relation or a transcendental relation, but just a regular old relation. And I see relations in the functional programming motif now as functions. So given some microsystem, I can affect change on that microsystem. And since, so this will take a microsystem and move it to a new state. And then I was playing with the idea of patterns as relationships and trying to get to do our patterns that we see in the macro state essentially byproducts of microstate causes? I don't know.
It's interesting thinking about it in the functional programming perspective too, and like side effects.
Yes. Yes.
Because in functional programming, you basically don't have them, right?
You do, and that's what the Oneida, not the Oneida lemma, sorry, the Kleistler category. So the Kleistler category says that we have a pair. So we have that which is a priori as one member of the pair, and that which is a posteriori as the other. And this is kind of the pairing between the vehicle and the replicator, right? Because the vehicle is a posteriori, right? It's something that exists in the world, but it always has this kind of a priori partner. And that's essentially what the Kleistler category is. It says everything in the Kleistler category is both. It has a priori component and an a posteriori component, and they are bound together fundamentally. And I think that that's a very, very deep insight. And that's what I'm trying to get at with this, the Dawkins stuff, right? The vehicles and replicators, because that's exactly what he's talking about. He's talking about the replicator being a priori, right? It is. And then the vehicle is the, yes.
I found a diagram that I was thinking about. This is the one, it looks similar to yours, a little bit different, but maybe it's worth looking at it. So basically, this the cell, he defines some internal states, there is some hidden states, and then there's the sensations, is whatever happens at the boundary. I guess these are your receptors. Mm-hmm. But he also talks about actions, like the internal state could affect something outside and then get feedback. So he has this whole theory sort of developed, he called the free energy theory. I think it's a little bit maybe controversial, but and I don't know what you would do with it, but I think it's a good way of thinking about it.
Oh, definitely take a look. Thank you. No, I wasn't even aware that others had done this, so that's very useful. Thank you. Your knowledge is just extraordinary.
I think he talks about the Markov blanket. That's why I remember it. That's when Robert was talking about them. I think the whole phrase Markov blanket might come from him when he was developing his theory.
Did he develop it in the 1700s?
Yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, I don't know.
No, I'm curious. Oh, 1959.
No,
Okay.
he's alive. He's not that old.
Oh,
I
okay.
mean,
Wow. Interesting.
another thread I came across that I think, Rose, you might be particularly interested in. So as you know, I don't know if I mentioned it, I am now at the University of AMI, Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute. I'm trying to find collaborators to do research. So one thread of research that I wasn't aware of is related to hierarchical reinforcement learning. So the idea is, so if you want to train an agent to do anything, let's say to move a robotic arm, you can of course have a choice of starting with sensory motor signals, like try to control every motor and every torque of everything and try to coordinate it all together. But of course it's infeasible. That's not how humans do it. You would want to develop these representations or medium sort of size actions that contain a whole bunch of those motors. So the whole idea of hierarchical models is how would you automatically discover those intermediates, what they call options, that you don't need to keep track of all the motor states, but you can just have an option of, I don't know, move the arm to the right. Like that's an action that, of course, you can specify it and figure it out. But the question is, can you go from the motor signals and discover those useful actions that will help you do stuff? So I think it relates, like the whole idea of hierarchical sort of thinking. I think that's what we've been talking about. Like, I guess you can think of it in terms of the representation, like coming from just sensory imagery, like what are the right ways of thinking about, like the whole idea of an object is an intermediate thing that is useful and we discovered it. So the question is, can we automatically discover more of these things that are useful or not? And there's like a whole bunch of research people doing it. I mean, I'm looking at it from a reinforcement learning perspective, but I think it could go in any direction.
So hierarchical in what sense? What is hierarchical? The learning or the model?
Both. So the whole idea is to build up by learning, I guess, lower level.
So you study
actions.
microstates, you gain system one perceptions of microstates, and then you elevate those to macrostates.
Exactly. Yeah. So what is the process of taking something from system one to system two through just experience without having to actually use system two, I guess, to do it?
Are they making progress? I'm sorry, I'm a bit skeptical, but like, is there useful output from the field, or are they just starting?
Nope, there's the actual robots they train. So the difficult part is discovering these intermediates. I guess like the whole idea of an object to discover is difficult, or the idea of what is the sequence of actions that you can clump together to call it a higher level action, right? The discovery of these things is the hardest part. But once you discover it, then it's super useful, because then you don't need to think about all the low level stuff. So they do that in robotics all the time.
And is this Peter Abeel and the other guy from Berkeley?
Peter Abeel works on it. Yeah, Sergey Levine, I think he's also the other guy.
I studied these guys for years ago, but yeah, no, I was very.
But I'm going back to some of the older literature from like Sutton from like 1990s. Yes. So I'm starting from what they did back in the day to see why, I guess, it didn't become more popular. So I'm sure there's lots of hard things that need to be figured out, but I think it's a useful direction of research, and it's hard. That's probably why people aren't doing it, because you need to pump out a bunch of papers every year to survive. So.
Yeah, so you are trying to publish through the university, or you're moving to the university, or what's going on?
Yeah, so I started at AMI, so it's Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute, which is a nonprofit.
So you don't work at the other place anymore?
No.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I thought I shared this. Sorry, I forgot.
No.
There's so many meetings. I don't know where I shared it.
It's fine. So you're now a full-time academic. Oh wow, that's great.
It's not an academic position, so I am in what they call the advanced tech group. So basically, we work with professors as well as the people from different companies to solve a problem. So I have like 4 or 5 different projects I'm working on, and for each project there is I guess, assigned professor who's expert in that field. And I'm sort of in the middle, trying to manage the grad students and the professors to get something done.
So are you moving to Alberta?
Yes. So at some point next year, so I'm supposed to go there 3 months after things open up, which at this point, I don't know when that's going to be.
So
So
which,
it might never
this
happen.
is which university?
University of Alberta.
But which campus, sorry? Is it in Calgary,
Edmonton,
Edmonton,
sorry,
or?
it's Edmonton.
Oh, Edmonton. Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Very cool. I didn't know that.
That sounds like a great position.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it seems okay. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Edmonton is not my first choice of places to live, but we'll see.
Isn't Sutton there?
Yeah, that's the whole point of going there. It's sort of the center of reinforcement learning, I guess, at least in Canada. DeepMind is also there. Microsoft is there. Yeah, there's lots of good places.
But they're very much, oh, maybe not. So this is reinforcement learning. This is the central thesis there. This isn't deep learning, this is reinforcement learning. So
yeah, I mean, deep learning is just, you could use it within reinforcement learning. Right? It's just a way to approximate the functions.
okay. And are they using OpenAI Gym as the fundamental foundational platform, or?
Who's they?
Oh, I see. Okay, so you have different groups who are using different. Okay, so let me ask you a different question. What platforms are you using to do the reinforcement learning?
So yeah, that's the thing. There is really no single platform that people use. So I think University of Alberta has their own platform. Facebook has their own. Google has their own. I think it's good practice to use OpenAI Gym sort of custom defined models, just so that you're compatible with most number of people. But yeah, I don't know if people actually do that.
Interesting. So you don't get to pick the research agenda. You're just trying to coordinate the actions of the professors and the grad students to get stuff done.
Well, that's my day job, I guess. But my ulterior motive is to sort of strike up collaborations with different groups. So I've been going to at least 2 group reading groups and sort of research meetings, just to try to see if there's a project I can start with them on the side. But yeah, as a day job, yeah, I guess I do have to participate in defining the scope of a project when we talk with the clients, but after that it's set and you just sort of try to do it.
Nice. No, I've got I haven't changed jobs yet, but we have our kind of group meeting on December 3rd, and we'll work out where we're going from there. I'm thinking of starting a new company, but
can you tell what's it going to be on, like the field or general idea?
Multi-agent simulation.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the agents to make things like buildings. So the construction industry. So my business partners have deep roots in the construction industry. So we're looking at using multi-agent simulations to have the agents construct objects. So you need to have a causal hierarchy whereby these actions cause these actions, and then like the presence of a wall allows you to, the presence of studs arranged in a certain way is a precursor to putting the drywall on, blah, blah, blah. So can I create multi-agent simulations that can simulate large construction projects? Basically, that's
cool. Well, that's really interesting. There's this platform. I'm also interested in multi-agent systems, but there's this platform called Cogmint. I don't know if you have heard of it.
Nope.
Let me find it.
How's it going with you, Rose? How's your interaction with the healthcare company going?
It's good. I mean, it's so different from what you're talking about right now. Like a lot of what I'm doing.
It's in paradigm, right? They have a whole paradigm of dealing with all of this, a whole language, a whole way of grasping it that is you have to.
It's not even that. Like so much of it is like operational, and the vast amount of data that's there, and everybody sort of thinks healthcare data it's completely objective and the meaning is clear. Like it's basically data semantics is what I really feel like I'm getting from this, and understanding how in every environment the data semantics are completely different, and then when people try and apply generalization to that, just how wrong it ends up. it's hard to explain because compared to what you guys are doing, I mean, this is just like vast, tons and tons and tons of health data that's coming and trying to make decisions on it. And yeah.
But you have a bunch of, you're not consuming the data directly, you're trying to orchestrate the data and put it into forms that are useful to other practitioners, or are you actually trying to draw inference?
Yeah, a lot of it is trying to work with, you know, leaders within the medical system to try and understand what data can be used and what do we have to do with it in order to make it useful, right? So there's just there's all this data that's out there being produced, and then various processes that are happening on different timescales to do different things with it, and it's just like being replicated all over the place. I mean, it's crazy. It's so different from the stuff you're talking about. Like just even like which data is correct anymore. Like it's just so much stuff. All the stuff is produced, and then it's just like replicated and transformed in various ways and stored in different places and
so it's
aggregated on different time frames.
Right.
It's
okay. At least you have access to it, right? I mean, most people don't even have access.
Yes, I mean, it is great. And like, you know, I had done work with small healthcare organizations where, you know, you're dealing with, you know, 300 patients with a particular complex presentation. And this is like just huge compared to that, right? And seeing these like highly complex cases where, you know, like these patients, like a lot of them are taking like 30, 40 medications is not unusual, right? Like it's just like, how does this happen? And how do we think, like you look at the diagnosis list and it's like there's something wrong with the way we're approaching it.
I have firsthand experience with this, right? I mean, the doctors, they just have a very greedy approach, right? You go with a condition, they don't know how to solve it. Nobody knows. They give you something to manage the symptom. That's what they do. And then the next thing comes up, they don't even care if it's related to the first one. Now you have a headache, take an aspirin. Then the next thing comes on, and then they keep prescribing you things that help you with your symptoms without actually understanding how these things interact with each other. Are they correlated? Like, I guess they just don't know.
And sort of putting like thinking about that, like we all think that medicine is practiced causally. Like I really don't think it is, right? There's a lot of the, well, here are my lucky socks. Like, let's put these on today. These seem to do something in this situation. Yeah.
The other thing that's, I think it's really interesting that I don't know people if they're paying attention, like, I guess, I think it's a bias in human mind. I read some cognitive science people talking about it, to try to add things to solve a problem, not subtract things. We have a strong bias. So sometimes like getting rid of a medication actually helps you more than increasing the dose. And we always add more. We never want to subtract.
Right. I think we've built a culture too, where like people feel like they're being, something is being like they're being withheld something that's going to change their lives completely if they don't get a prescription in a particular situation. And honestly, based on my experience watching people go through it when I was in private practice, it's like less is more, less is more, less is more. Like every time you add something in, right, if you believe it's going to change the system, then it's going to have side effects too that you need to consider. And so you just see these people get sicker and sicker and sicker, and the diagnosis list grows and the number of medications grow and quality of life just degrades, right? It's, I just look at it and I'm like, how does anybody objectively think this is a good situation, right? Like we talk about how many advances we've made, but it's like a larger and larger chunk of the population is becoming more and more chronically ill.
This is good business, right? That's part of the problem.
It's so sad. Like, and then watching like how the pharmaceutical companies work with, you know, there are all these patient advocacy groups that they're out there trying to help themselves and help each other. And then the pharmaceuticals come in and use them as influencers to basically drive the medical profession to prescribe this, it's going to help me. It's like doctors are in a terrible situation then when they're being presented, objective data that the pharmaceutical company has come up with. It's, in terms of a dynamical system and watching how it's evolving, and it's just like the cycles are getting faster and faster.
I know, but there's a lot of agency in keeping the system going and not driving it into crisis where changes will actually occur.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so many people have tried, right? Like if you Amazon got involved and Berkshire Hathaway, they all left after 2 years. It's like, I can't fix this.
Yeah, because the system is stable, right? It self-corrects, and perturbations are nullified, so you can't move it. It just, let's move it to the left. Okay, you moved it to the left. Okay, let go. Whoop, then we're back here again. God. So,
it's interesting in terms of the narrative stuff, right? Like telling people this is helping them and that this is going to help them, but the evidence actually isn't there to show that it is helpful in the long run. Right. And if you look at the trajectory that most of these patients follow, it's like, I don't understand it. I just don't understand how we keep moving forward with this. And I actually, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say there's also lots of just as an outsider, correct me if this is wrong, but there's lots of conflicts of interest that are so apparent and nobody can do anything about. Like if you go to a doctor, like they might give their daughter or son a completely different prescription that they would give you because they don't want to be sued by you, even though they know this is the right thing to do. That's like the guidelines that were given. If they deviate and you die, then somebody could sue them, and they just don't do it. So that's just already like, I can't trust my doctor. I have to Google and make my own decision because I don't trust that the doctor has my best interests in mind. If they have their own best interests in mind first.
You see, I wouldn't even describe it like that. Like, because I think most doctors get into the practice of medicine because they want to do good, right? But
sure, this
is where standardization is a problem in my mind, and like, standard of care. It sort of takes least common denominator, and then the doctor is in a terrible situation of where if standard of care does not align with their experience, if they don't follow standard of care, right, they will be sued, they'll lose their jobs. And so it's kind of the same thing that's happened with democracy. It's taken the decision-making away from the individuals who have experience, and it's centralized it in a place where there are influencers that are pushed in a certain direction by motivations that are very different than helping the patient, right? And I don't think that any of the people in those roles would say, yeah, I am the problem. But anybody who's taking money for pharmaceutical companies for speaking engagements or anything else, that's just wrong. Like there's no other way to look at it, right? You're either there to help the patients or you're there to try and make money. And I don't know how you solve that.
Yes, very challenging. No, I have lots of anecdotal stories in the healthcare myself, but I won't. But yes, no, very much along those lines. Like doctors are, like when a doctor is diagnosed with cancer, they don't go for all the crazy cancer treatments because they know they don't work. They just try and maximize the quality of life that they had left and just let it unfold.
One of the pieces of my portfolio right now is working with like care planning with people and trying to get in front of chronically ill patients well in advance of where big decisions have to be made, and just talking to them about what they want for themselves. Like if you look at the way most people die, it used to be that you would accept, right, when you're 80 whatever, right, you die. That's what happens. That's what happens. Whereas now people spend the last however many years of their lives like undergoing these extreme treatments that it's really questionable how beneficial they are to anybody. And instead of people being home spending time with their families, they're like racing around to doctor's appointments, and they're told that they need this. It's like you don't need this at this point in your life. Yeah.
It reminds me of who was that? Which I can't remember which Rockefeller. He had like 3 heart transplants before he died. Like he just couldn't die. I guess he was too rich to die. It's just I don't even know how you would get 3 transplants. I thought they would reject you after like the first 2 maybe.
Yeah, I would imagine that if the normal standards and ethics were being applied, you would not be able to get three heart transplants. But I mean, then it becomes about like, this is kind of comes back to like, how do you measure value in life, right? And if you measure your value in terms of longevity, I want to live as long as possible, right? I don't want to live as long as possible if it means staying in a hospital for however many years of my life, right? Like, I'd much prefer to live well for a certain amount of time, right? And okay, now it's time to die. So
yeah, I mean, an interesting example is my father-in-law, who's a sweet old guy, I guess, but he has dementia, but his body is actually quite healthy, right? So he doesn't have a mind, like he can't remember where he is. And if you ask him what's going on, he'll invent something like the pigeons. He'll invent some incredibly elaborate situation as to how he, oh, we're on a cruise ship and we're, blah, 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 right? He'll generate explanations spontaneously, but he's happy.
Does he seem happy?
Yeah, like his system 1 is working. Like he wakes up in the morning and goes for a walk, and like he's in a facility that's taking very good care of him. He eats good food. What do you want? I mean,
again, it's like who's to say his reality is any less valid than ours, right? Just
could argue shorter memory is like helps your happiness, right?
yeah.
I mean, I think you see some people sometimes where they're sort of on the edge, and they know, right, that they know that they're not behaving the way they
would be scary,
before. And I think that's really hard. But then you see people who are completely happy, and it's like, great, there's no problem there as far as I'm concerned.
Well, you've got to pay for somebody to feed him and look after him, which is not free. But other than that, yes, it's a reasonable, like it's a dignified existence, even though he isn't, he's 89 or something. So he's an older gentleman, but what do you want? Yeah, so. All right, folks, I had the onerous task of trying to come up with something for next week. This has been an interesting thread. Do we want to keep going down this thread? Payan, you presented that very interesting paper by Jan LeCun. Should we take a run at that one for next time? Would that be of interest to you, Rose, or not?
Yeah.
It's up to you. I guess we gotta make sure Rob also likes. I don't know. I don't want him to stop coming because we're talking about things he doesn't care about. So
Rob, Neal or Rob?
Rob Neal, yeah.
I spoke. Rob's a very good friend of mine. I speak to him all the time. He couldn't make it today. Sorry. No. Okay. I'm actively working on an economic simulator with him based on all the stuff I was sharing with you today. We hope to publish something on it. So he's fine. Rob's completely fine. He'll be here. There's no problem there at all. He's genuinely interested. He's just had an event today. So
okay.
All right. So
yeah, I mean, I covered those papers. I mean, maybe have a look first before you nominate it, just to make sure you like it. It's more on the, I guess, nitty-gritty technical math parts of things. So decide. I mean, the general discussion of interpolation versus extrapolation is interesting by itself, but it did cause a lot of controversy when we had it in another meetup. There are some people who were thinking one way versus the other, and they both felt very strongly. So that might be an interesting thing to discuss here. I'm curious what you guys think, but yeah, so I am interested.
A topic for you though, is it not interesting? Or?
No, I am interested. I don't know. I am undecided, so I want to hear what you guys think about it. So.
All right, so I'll post that. I mean, I'll read it first, and then if I think it's good, we'll go with that. Otherwise, cool. Yeah, I'm really finding Kant's categories very interesting. Let me just spend 2 minutes on that with you now. Maybe that'll be a topic for a future.
And we had talked about Kuhn too, right? Like wasn't that?
Okay, sure. Yeah, no, we should definitely talk about
I really
Kuhn.
like the idea of doing that as well. It doesn't have to be next week, but I would like to.
Okay, great. That's why I'm trying to. I'm trying to fish for things to talk about. Okay, great. All right. So if it's not the LeCun paper, which is kind of contemporary, then I think that have you read the book, Rose?
No.
It's a reasonably well done audiobook. I don't know if you do. I don't know how you read.
Yeah,
it,
I do. I do audio. Yeah.
So it's quite a well done audiobook. He actually the book has a very rough start. I'll be the first to admit. The first, like, don't skip kind of the first two not chapters, but like there's an introduction by somebody else who says his opening line is, you should read the rest of the book before you listen to this, and take him at his word. You really should.
Right.
So
skip the first two chapters.
Yeah, I mean, it's very anecdotal, but if you kind of jump into it, and what I think is called chapter 1, which is actually after the introduction and after the whatever it is, it starts off well. He wrote it in a very politically correct way, so he's not as strong as he could have been. But if you get to chapters 12 and 13, I think that's where it gets really, really interesting, where he's actually talking about scientists creating pictures in their minds. And it's fascinating.
He was resisted during his time because he sort of goes hard on scientists, tries to basically judge them as human beings doing science. They're not super objective. It's just like the rest of us. They have their own biases and politics and all that stuff. And that's why people didn't like him, I guess, when he came up with it. So if you read about him, lots of people criticize him. But if you read what he writes, I think it makes perfect sense.
Cool.
So, if you read anything, maybe it'll be chapters 12 and 13. I might actually see if I can find some excerpts and post them to the group. But
I think somebody posted one of the Stanford links to his stuff too, right?
Yeah, I've got that open here. I can post that.
Yeah, why don't we do that next week? Do you want to do that next week?
Okay, let's do Kuhn next week then. All right, so we'll do the Stanford Kuhn piece next week. Okay. Excellent.
Great. All right, have a great weekend, everyone.
You too.
Bye.
You too.
See you next
Take
week.
care.
Bye. Congratulations on your new job, Brian. Excellent.
Yeah, congratulations. Sounds great.
Thanks.
Bye.